few minutes later, Kevin found himself walking down Fifth Avenue in the middle of a crowd of last-minute shoppers. Harry and Marv each had a firm grip on one of his arms. Kevin knew his future didn't look bright. These guys definitely planned to do something bad to him. He secretly reached into his coat pocket and pressed the record button on his talkboy. "What are you guys doing in New York?" Kevin asked. "We've busted out of the joint, kid," Marv said proudly. "At midnight tonight, we're hitting Duncan's toy chest. Then we're gonna get us some phony passports."
You want to shut up, Marv?
Harry snapped. "What's the difference?" Marv asked.
He ain't gonna tell nobody, except maybe the fish. Let's just get him down to the subway tunnel, Harry said. I'll feel a lot better when he's on ice.
Kevin reached into his pocket and felt for his plane ticket. If he could get away from these guys, he'd get the first plane home and never come back to New York again.
Hey, what's this?
Marv suddenly grabbed Kevin's hand and pulled it out of his pocket. Marv yanked the ticket out of Kevin's hand and read it.
1 round-trip ticket to Miami, Florida. Hey, I think the squirt must have gotten on the wrong plane. His family's probably in Florida, Harry said. Yeah, Marv laughed and ripped the ticket into little pieces. You won't be needing this no more, little dude. American Airlines don't fly to the promised land.
Kevin watched the torn pieces of the ticket flutter to the sidewalk. Now what was he going to do? He saw a policeman up ahead, but Harry squeezed his arm.
I got a gun in my pocket, Harry whispered. You open your mouth to that cop, and you'll be able to spit gum out through your forehead.
Kevin didn't have a chance as they walked past the policeman. Back in the crowds again, he felt the bad guys loosen their grip on his arms. This might be his last opportunity. An attractive woman in a white fur coat was in front of them. Kevin reached forward and pinched her. She spun around to face Marv and made a fist. Marv smiled. As Marv tumbled backward, he let go of Kevin's arm. Kevin quickly turned and socked Harry in the stomach with all his might. The bad guy instantly dropped to his knees. Kevin stared at his little fist in amazement. Then he grabbed the brown travel bag and took off across the street, leaving Marv on his back and Harry on his knees.
Where's the kid?
Marv groaned.
Headed for the park, Harry grimaced. He hit me in the ulcer.
Marv helped Harry to his feet and they ran into the park looking for Kevin.
We should have shot him when we had the chance,
Harry grumbled, looking around at the trees and joggers. Marv said, he's alone, and he's in the park, and it's going to be dark soon. Grown men come in here and don't get out alive.
Yeah,
Harry started to grin.
Good luck, little fella,
he shouted, and then turned to Marv.
I think it's time we paid Duncan's toy chest another visit.
Curled up in the storage box behind a hansom cab, Kevin heard Harry's shout. A long time passed. Finally, he peeked out. The sky was grey, and the park was dark and cold. He climbed out of the box, hugged himself, and shivered. He was alone, without a place to stay, without a way to fly home, or to Miami, or any place else. And it was Christmas Eve. I want to go home, he sniffed.
Mom, where are you?
The rain poured down relentlessly. Kate sat in the motel room staring at the phone. It rang, and Kate grabbed it.
Yes?
It's Officer Bennett, ma'am. We've located your son.
Oh, my gosh!
Kate shook Peter's shoulder.
What?
He asked.
It's Officer Bennett,
Kate said.
They know where Kevin is.
Where? Peter said.
Where?
Kate asked.
New York City, ma'am,
Officer Bennett replied.
He's wanted for unauthorized use of a credit card in the Plaza Hotel.
What? Kate gasped.
What?
Peter gasped.
He's wanted for unauthorized use of a credit card,
Kate told her husband.
Do they have him?
She asked Officer Bennett.
I'm afraid not, ma'am,
he said.
He ran away.
Darn it, she muttered.
We'll catch the next flight,
Kate told Officer Bennett.
And thank you so much for your help.
She hung up and looked sadly at her husband.
So we know he's in New York, by himself. I don't know whether to be thrilled or terrified.
I wonder if he'd know enough to go to my brother's place, Peter said. Didn't you say they were in the middle of a major renovation? Kate asked.
Peter nodded and sighed. You're right. The place probably isn't even inhabitable right now.
Uncle Rob's house was on a dark side street about a block from Central Park. Kevin stopped in front of Uncle Rob's house and felt his heart sink. The building was dark and boarded up. The whole first floor was hidden behind a scaffolding. Kevin climbed the concrete steps and knocked. No one answered. He pressed his nose against the window and looked inside. The place was a wreck. The walls had been stripped away, leaving a wooden framework. The floors had been ripped up, too, the bare beams covered here and there with large, flat sheets of plywood. Scattered around the plywood were ladders, workmen's tools, coils of rope, bricks, and cans of paint and varnish. Kevin shivered and felt a little scared. It was hopeless. Kevin started back down a street called Central Park West. He came to a corner and saw several men in tattered coats sifting through garbage bins for soda cans. Kevin glanced nervously across the street to Central Park. It looked scary on that side of the street, but there might be fewer people, so when the light changed, he crossed. Kevin started to run. He didn't want to be in this cold, shadowy place with all these scary people. Suddenly he saw a cab parked at the curb. "Hey, taxi!" he shouted. A second later, he yanked open the door and jumped in. He slid into the back seat and tried to catch his breath. "Boy," he gasped, "it's scary out there." The cab driver slowly turned around. He had a pockmarked, unshaven face, a bent nose, cracked and bloodied lips, and eyes that were dull and cloudy. When he saw Kevin, he grinned, revealing pitted, discolored teeth.
Ain't much better in here, bud, he said.
Ah! Kevin screamed and jumped out of the cab. He ran into the park and followed a trail that led to a large mass of dark gray rock rising out of the ground. Kevin found a deep gap between two boulders and squeezed in between them. The walls of rock were cold and uninviting, but he'd finally found a quiet place where he could catch his breath and be alone. Opening the travel bag, he took out a bag of Doritos and tore it open. Boy, he thought, as he pressed a handful of corn chips into his mouth, I don't ever want to take a vacation like this again. A cooing sound startled him, and he turned to find a pigeon standing on the rock behind him. Kevin smiled. He broke off a piece of a Dorito and held it out to the bird. "At least you're nicer than the people around here," Kevin said. But when he looked up again, there were now 10 pigeons looking down at him from the top of the rock. "Where'd you guys come from?" Kevin asked, surprised. Then one pigeon started to rise from the rock. Something began to appear under the pigeon's feet. Filthy gray hair, a forehead, bushy eyebrows, then eyes. Ah! Kevin jumped back. It was her, that crazy, disgusting pigeon lady. He turned and tried to run, but his foot got caught in a crack between the rocks. The pigeon lady was reaching toward him with filthy, gnarled fingers. What was she going to do? Kevin felt the pigeon lady's hand go around his ankle and push down gently until his foot was freed. Then she backed away. Suddenly, Kevin realized she hadn't meant him any harm. She'd only tried to help. Curiosity replaced his fright. "I'm sorry I screamed in your face," he said. "You were just trying to help me, right?" The pigeon lady nodded and took another step back. Kevin could see she was really nervous. "I'm Karen McAllister," he said. "Your birds are real nice." The pigeon lady stared curiously. The pigeon lady blinked. Kevin wondered what she was thinking. "Hey, if I'm bothering you, just tell me and I'll leave." She started to open her mouth, but at first no words came out. Then she said, "No," in a voice so small Kevin could hardly hear it. "You sure I'm not a pain?" Kevin asked. The pigeon lady shook her head. "Good." Kevin felt relieved. Then he became aware of a whole chorus of cooing birds. He looked up at the trees and saw the outlines of hundreds of pigeons on the bare branches. The pigeon lady reached into her pocket, took out a handful of seeds, and put them in Kevin's hand, motioning him to throw them. Kevin threw the seed, and immediately the pigeons swarmed down and started pecking.
Hey, that's great.
Kevin said. A crooked little smile appeared on the pigeon lady's face. A chilly gust of wind blew past. Kevin shivered.
It's pretty cold out, he said. I could sure go for a hot cup of chocolate. How about you?
The pigeon lady gave him a puzzled, uncertain look.
Maybe you prefer coffee,
Kevin said.
Either way, it's my treat.
In a million years, Kevin couldn't have imagined the place where the pigeon lady wanted to drink her coffee. She led him up a fire escape alongside Radio City Music Hall. They climbed through a window and sat on a metal grating. As Kevin sipped his hot chocolate, he stared down at the stage below where a dozen ballerinas twirled to music played by the orchestra.
I've heard that music before,
Kevin said.
It's the Nutcracker,
The pigeon lady said.
It's nice,
Kevin said.
And warm,
The pigeon lady added.
Is this where you live?
Kevin asked.
No,
She said.
I have an apartment. Do you have any kids?
The pigeon lady shook her head.
I wanted them, but the man I loved fell out of love with me. Broke my heart. You might say I stopped trusting people. I was afraid of getting my heart broken again.
The pigeon lady explained.
I can sort of understand that,
Kevin said.
I used to have this really nice pair of roller skates, and I was afraid that if I wore them, I'd wreck them. So I kept them in the box, and you know what happened?
The pigeon lady shook her head.
I outgrew them. I never got to use them. A person's feelings are a little different than skates,
The pigeon lady said.
It's kind of the same thing,
Kevin said.
If you aren't going to use your heart, if you just keep it to yourself, by the time you do decide to use it, it may not be any good. So why not take a chance?
The pigeon lady nodded.
Yeah, there's some truth to that.
I think so, said Kevin.
Your heart may still be broken, but it's not gone. If it was gone, you wouldn't be this nice.
The pigeon lady sighed.
I guess I was working pretty hard at keeping people away. I know what you mean,
Kevin said.
I always think I'll have a lot of fun if I'm alone, but when there's no one around, it isn't fun at all. So why are you alone on Christmas Eve?
The pigeon lady asked.
Did you do something wrong? A lot of things,
Kevin admitted.
Did you know that a good deed erases a bad deed? It's probably too late for that,
Kevin said with a shrug.
Why don't you think of the most important thing you can do for others right now and go do it?
Kevin wondered what that would be. He got up.
I better go see what I can do,
he said.
But listen, if I don't see you again, I hope everything comes out all right. And say goodbye to your birds for me, okay? I will,
The pigeon lady said.
Merry Christmas.
Kevin waved and started to climb out the window to the fire escape. Back down on the dark sidewalk, Kevin tried to think of what he could do to help others. He walked along until he found himself at New York Children's Hospital. Kevin stared up at the windows decorated with blinking Christmas lights. Kevin felt a pang in his heart. It was sad to think of kids his own age, cooped up in a hospital on Christmas Eve, too sick to be home with their families. Of all the good deeds he could do, Kevin wished he could do something for the kids in that hospital. Wait a minute. The bad guys were planning to rob Duncan's toy chest. Hadn't that white-haired guy said all the money in the store was going to this hospital? Kevin's eyes widened. The bad guys were going to steal the hospital's money. Kevin clenched his fists in anger. It was bad to mess with sick kids, but to do it on Christmas was inexcusable. Now he knew what his good deed had to be. He had to stop those guys from robbing the toy store. A little while later, Kevin was walking back up Central Park West. He knew he didn't stand a chance battling the bad guys in the street. But in a house, that was a different story. By the time he got to Uncle Rob's house, Kevin had started to formulate a plan. It would be called Operation Ho, Ho, Ho. Shortly after the plane from Miami landed at LaGuardia Airport in New York, a convoy of yellow cabs pulled up in front of the Plaza Hotel, and the McAllisters jumped out. Kate went to the concierge's desk, red-faced and furious. On the other side of the desk stood the concierge and Ms. Acevedo, the clerk who'd checked Kevin into the hotel.
What kind of a hotel lets a child check in alone?
Kate demanded.
Well, the boy had a convincing story, credit card, and a reservation,
Ms. Acevedo stammered. Kate glared at the clerk in disbelief and then turned to the concierge.
What kind of idiots do you have working for you?
The concierge swallowed.
The finest in New York City, ma'am. It's Christmas Eve, Kate hissed. And because of you, my son is lost in one of the biggest cities in the world.
I'm truly sorry, madam. The concierge apologized.
You're going to be more than sorry, Peter said angrily. After we find our son, I suggest you prepare yourself for a civil suit.
The concierge blanched.
Sir, you must understand it was an innocent mistake.
But in order to make it easier for you, we'd like to give you a complimentary suite here at the hotel for as long as it takes to find your son.
Think you could make that 2 complimentary suites?
Frank asked.
I suppose we could give you an extra-large
suite, the concierge said.
Sounds fair,
said Frank. Kate turned to stare at the lights of the city and began to realize the enormity of the challenge that lay ahead. Somewhere, out there, helpless, lost and afraid, was her son. It would have stunned Kate to learn that her son was only a few blocks away at that moment, his face pressed against the window of Duncan's toy chest. On the sidewalk next to him was a plank of wood, a can of paint, and a brick. Inside, on the second floor, Marv and Harry let themselves out of their playhouses. The store was dim and quiet. The 2 bad guys trotted down the unmoving escalator. On the first floor, they vaulted over the cashier's counter. Harry jammed his crowbar into a cash register and started to pry it open. The cash drawer slid out, revealing thick wads of green currency.
Look at all that moolah,
Marv whispered.
Must be Christmas.
Harry winked happily. Marv quickly opened the next register. It, too, was filled with cash. Harry laughed as he dumped the bills into a green gym bag he'd taken from the sporting goods department.
The amazing thing, said Marv, is we're fugitives from the law. We're up to our elbows in cash money, and there ain't nobody who knows about it.
Outside on the sidewalk, Kevin turned the paint can on its side and laid the plank of wood across it, creating a teeter-totter. Then he took an envelope out of his pocket. On it, he'd written, "To Mr. Duncan, the guy who owns this store." Inside was a special message. Using a rubber band, he wrapped the envelope around the brick. Kevin looked through the window and watched as Harry and Marv gathered up all the money that was supposed to go to the kids at the children's hospital.
This is it,
he thought. There's no turning back. Another Christmas in the trenches. He knocked on the window. Inside, Harry and Marv looked up. They stared in disbelief. "He's back!" Marv gasped. They watched in frozen horror as Kevin took the Polaroid camera out of his father's travel bag and focused it. Before Harry and Marv had a chance to react, Kevin had taken a picture of them, hands full of cash, standing in front of a broken cash register. Through the window, they watched Kevin remove the photo and stick it in the travel bag.
He took our picture,
Harry groaned. But Kevin wasn't finished. He picked up the brick and threw it. The whole window shattered into tiny chunks of glass. A symphony of burglar alarms went off. Kevin backed a safe distance away down the sidewalk.
"We gotta get out of here!"
Harry shouted, grabbing the gym bag filled with money. He vaulted over the window display and jumped through the open space where the window had been. He landed on the wooden plank, slamming one end of it to the sidewalk. A second later, Marv sailed through the window and landed on the high end of the plank, catapulting Harry into the air. Marv looked around for his partner.
Harry?
Harry hit the sidewalk on his back and lay there, dazed. As Marv helped him up, there was another flash from Kevin's camera.
He took another picture!
Marv yelled.
We gotta get him!
Harry shouted. Kevin started to run. In the distance, police sirens began to wail as they responded to the burglar alarms. Looking back, Kevin saw the bad guys chasing him. If he couldn't beat them to Uncle Rob's house, he was dead meat. As Kevin ran down the sidewalk toward his Uncle Rob's house, he could hear Harry and Marv huffing and puffing behind him. He quickly hopped into a dumpster and crawled up the refuse chute to the 3rd floor, then climbed one more set of stairs to the flat asphalt roof. He ran to the edge of the building and looked down. On the street below, Harry and Marv stopped and gasped for breath.
Where is he?
Harry wheezed, looking around.
I don't know.
Marv replied, panting.
I'm up here, you jerks!
Kevin waved down from the roof.
Come and get me! Let's kill!
Marv growled. He started toward the steps to the brownstone.
Hold on, pea-brain.
Harry grabbed him by the collar.
Don't you remember we got busted last time because we underestimated that little bundle of misery?
This ain't like the last time, Harry,
Marv replied.
This ain't his house. He ain't got a plan.
Harry rolled his eyes.
May I do the thinking, please?
He looked back up at Kevin.
Sonny, nothing would thrill me more than to shoot you. You understand?
Kevin stared down without answering.
But here's the deal,
Harry continued.
why don't you just throw down your camera, okay? We won't hurt you, and you'll never see us again. Sound good? Promise?
Kevin asked.
Cross my heart.
Harry said.
Okay.
Kevin picked up a brick and launched it. It smashed Marv on the head. Kevin smiled. Direct hit. Marv was lying on the sidewalk, knocked out. Harry looked down at his unconscious partner.
Don't worry, Marv. The kid's dead. Nobody throws bricks at me and gets away with it.
Leaving Marv to recover, Harry sneaked down an alley behind the brownstone. He climbed up on a dumpster to reach the fire escape. Harry crouched down, then sprang forward. His hands went around the bottom rung of the fire escape, but Kevin had greased it. Harry went down. Harry hit the ground, flat on his back. Marv staggered up the front steps and tried to open the door, but the knob came off in his hands. There was a string attached to the knob. Marv pulled on it. The string was connected to a staple gun aimed through the keyhole. Marv screamed and grabbed his rear end. He had just stapled his pants to his behind. As he spun around, the string went tight again. Marv caught 3 more staples in the hip and doubled over in agony. The last 3 staples stapled Marv's hat to his head. In the back, Harry slowly rose to his feet and stepped onto the back porch. He tried the rear door, but the knob spun loosely in his hand. He gave the door a ferocious kick. Kevin had tied a cord from the top of the door to the zipper of a plumber's bag hanging upside down over the porch. When the door flew back, it pulled the zipper open. A dozen heavy iron wrenches crashed down on Harry's head. Marv grabbed his hat with both hands and pulled. The hat came off, along with several pieces of pink scalp.
That's it!
Marv shouted.
I'm coming in!
Marv hit the front door with his shoulder and he flew into the house. Kevin had pulled away the plywood on the floor and Marv fell straight down into the basement. He hit the floor and laid there for a moment, then rose to his feet and promptly fell again. He gave the floor a closer look. It was glistening. The kid must have spread some kind of liquid soap on the ground. Marv spotted a large paint cabinet a few feet away. Slipping and sliding, Marv managed to grab the edge of the cabinet. Suddenly, it started to tip. A dozen open paint cans crashed down, knocking him to the floor. Marv staggered to his feet, drenched with thick, gooey paint. Groping for something to wipe his eyes with, he found a piece of cloth and pressed it against his face. But it wouldn't come off. The kid must have put glue on the cloth. Marv yanked it in frustration.
Yeah!
Marv looked down at the cloth and gasped. Staring back at him from the cloth were his eyebrows, mustache, and goatee. On the back porch, Harry crawled out from under the pile of wrenches. He limped into the dark house and felt his way through the hallway. He stepped into a small bathroom. He saw a light string and pulled it. A light went on. Harry felt his head growing hot. He looked up at the ceiling into the blue flame of a butane torch. His hat was on fire. Harry twisted the water knobs on the sink, but no water came out. His head was burning up. Looking around desperately, he saw the toilet. What choice did he have? Harry dunked his flaming head. The toilet bowl erupted in flames. Harry straightened up and stared at himself in the mirror. Smoke rose from his head. The kid had filled the toilet bowl with paint thinner. Drenched to the bone, Marv looked for a way out of the basement. He saw a rope hanging down from the first floor. He gave it a little tug, but nothing happened. Filled with hope, Marv grabbed the rope and started to pull himself up. Suddenly, the rope came loose. Marv looked up, just in time to see a 75-pound bag of plaster hurtling down through the beams. The bag hit Marv on the head and drove him to the basement floor. Marv pushed himself up. The white powder had stuck to the wet paint, making him look like a snowman. He was gonna murder that kid. On the first floor, Kevin stood and listened. Things were going just as planned. But now it was time to draw the bad guys upstairs. He shouted,
Don't you guys know that a kid always wins against two idiots?
Harry heard Kevin and dashed out of the bathroom. Marv threw a rope over the beams and started to pull himself out of the basement. Kevin quickly scrambled up a ladder leading through a hole in the living room ceiling. Harry ran to the ladder to follow Kevin up. He didn't know that Kevin had sawed the ladder halfway through. Just as Harry reached the ceiling, the ladder broke in two. Then Harry and the ladder slammed to the living room floor. Marv ran in and found his partner lying on the floor. Kevin leaned over the hole in the ceiling and waved down.
Hey, guys, why don't you try the stairs?
Harry and Marv ran out of the room. Marv was just about to run up the stairs when Harry grabbed his arm.
Hold on, he whispered. Don't you remember what happened last time?
Marv thought for a second. Oh, yeah, the paint cans tied to the ropes.
Right, now watch.
Harry stamped his feet as if he were going up the stairs. A second later, a paint can tied to a rope swung down the staircase.
Ow!
Harry shouted, pretending it had hit him.
That's one,
he whispered. Marv chuckled, then stamped his feet, shouting, Don't worry, Harry, I'll get him. A second can swung down.
Oh!
Marv shouted. Then he whispered, That's two.
Now he thinks we've both been clocked,
Harry whispered.
Let's go!
They started to run up the stairs. At the top, Kevin waited, holding a 4-foot length of iron sewage pipe over his head. Harry and Marv froze. Kevin swung the pipe down.
Ah!
The bad guys shouted in unison. The pipe hit them. They both tumbled backwards down the stairs. They fell through the open floor beams and into the basement. Marv opened his eyes. That's 3, he groaned. Kevin dropped the pipe, and it banged down the stairs and teetered on the edge of the beam over the basement. It rolled off. Both bad guys crashed to the basement floor again, with the pipe resting on their chests. That's 4, Marv said groggily. Kevin ran up the stairs to the roof, where he'd left a long coil of rope soaking in a bucket of kerosene. One end of the rope was tied around a 100-pound bag of cement. Kevin pulled on a pair of work gloves and threw the rest of the rope over the side of the building. Then he carefully lowered himself down the rope to the scaffolding beside the first floor. Harry and Marv climbed out of the basement and up the stairs.
I don't care if I get the chair,
Harry swore as he lugged the green gym bag filled with cash.
I'm gonna kill that kid.
If we catch him,
Marv said.
We'll catch him,
Harry said.
He's on the roof. Where's he gonna go?
They reached the top of the stairs and kicked open the roof door.
Surrender, kid,
Harry shouted as they stepped out.
I don't see him, Harry,
Marv said.
I'm down here, you morons!
Kevin shouted from below. Harry and Marv ran to the edge of the roof and looked down. Kevin waved and yelled.
Nice night for a neck injury.
Let's get him,
Marv shouted. Harry slapped him on the head.
Are you nuts? That's exactly what he wants us to do. Look,
He pointed to the bag of cement.
it'll hold the kid. It ain't gonna hold us. We'll just have to disappoint the little creep.
Harry untied the rope from the bag and knotted it securely around a vent pipe. Then he started to lower himself down the rope.
Harry, you're a genius,
Marv said as he followed his partner over the side. Kevin watched from 2 stories below. This is gonna be good, he thought, as he struck a kitchen match against the brick. He held the brightly glowing match to the bottom of the rope.
Merry Christmas, guys!
Harry watched in horror as the bottom of the kerosene-soaked rope burst into flames. Instantly, Marv and Harry started wriggling upward, but the flames were faster than the bad guys. On the scaffolding, Kevin quickly checked to make sure the planks of wood and open cans of varnish were in position for the final bombing. Then he grabbed his father's brown travel bag, jumped down to the sidewalk, and ran toward the park. A second later, Kevin heard screams as Marv and Harry let go of the burning rope and crashed through the loose wooden planks of the scaffolding, catapulting the pails of varnish high into the air. The varnish poured down over them. Then they were each smashed on the head with an empty varnish can. At the corner opposite the park, Kevin ran up to a payphone and quickly punched 911. The most dangerous part of Operation Ho 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 was about to begin.
911.
An operator answered. "Quick!" Kevin gasped.
The 2 guys who robbed Duncan's toy chest are in Central Park at 96th Street. Hurry, they've got a gun!
Kevin hung up and looked down the block. Marv and Harry had just crawled out of the garden in front of Uncle Rob's house.
Hey, I'm down here!
Kevin yelled. As the bad guy started running toward him, Kevin crossed the street. He jumped onto the sidewalk, but slipped and fell on some ice. The travel bag flew a dozen feet away. He had to get the bag. Inside were the photos of the bad guys in Duncan's toy chest and the tape Kevin had made of Marv discussing the plans for the robbery. Kevin scrambled over the ice, reached the bag and grabbed it. Then he felt a hand yank him back. The next thing Kevin knew, he was staring at Harry's bruised and swollen face.
Let's go for a stroll, kid.
Harry started to drag Kevin into the park, Marv following behind. A few moments later, near the same rocks where Kevin had hidden earlier that night, Harry slammed him to the ground and ripped the bag out of his hands. He opened it and dug out the Polaroids and slipped them into the green gym bag filled with cash. He took out the talk boy and pressed play. Marv's voice came out.
At midnight tonight, we're hitting Duncan's toy chest.
Harry glared at his partner.
Didn't I tell you to keep your mouth shut?
He put the talk boy into the gym bag. Harry grabbed Kevin and yanked him up.
You oughtn't to mess around with us, pal. We can be dangerous.
Kicking his feet helplessly in the air, Kevin suddenly saw something that made him stop struggling. Harry had taken out a gun. Kevin was so scared, he didn't notice that the trees around him were starting to fill up with pigeons. But Marv did.
Harry?
shut up!
Harry snapped. Kevin stared straight down the barrel of the gun.
Maybe we better get out of here,
Marv said nervously.
I said, shut up!
Harry growled. Harry cocked the gun. Kevin closed his eyes and held his breath. Suddenly, someone said,
Let him go.
Kevin felt Harry's grip on his neck loosen. He opened his eyes. The pigeon lady was standing behind the bad guys with a bucket in her hands. She swung the bucket, showering them with bird seed. Most of it stuck to the varnish, making the bad guys look like two giant bird treats. The huge flock of hungry pigeons attacked. Harry and Marv screamed and dove to the ground. In an instant, they were covered by an army of pecking pigeons. Police cars with lights flashing now poured into the park and screeched to a halt. A dozen policemen jumped out and surrounded the two bad guys, who were almost invisible beneath the swirling mound of pigeons. One of the cops raised his gun and fired. In an instant, the startled pigeons were aloft, leaving the two terrified bad guys trembling on the ground. They staggered to their feet, covered from head to foot with pigeon feathers. "Look at this!" A cop had found the green gym bag. Inside was the stolen money, the photos, and the cassette of Marv planning the crime. Kevin watched as Marv and Harry were handcuffed and read their rights. A cop shoved Harry into the back of the squad car. As Marv bent down to follow him into the car, he said to the cop,
My partner's still a little cranky. We just broke out of jail a few days ago.
The cop pushed Marv in beside Harry. Suddenly there was a loud thumping sound, and Marv yelped in pain. Then the door slammed. From his perch on a nearby rock, Kevin smiled. Operation Ho 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 was a complete success. He was just about to thank the police when he remembered that he was still wanted for credit card fraud. Maybe it was better if he just slipped away in the dark. In the extra-large suite at the plaza, Kate sat by the window, wondering where her little boy was. Her other children were sprawled asleep around her. Peter was slumped in a chair, snoring. Kate sighed. It was almost midnight, and she felt helpless and very, very sad. Not far away, Kevin wandered along the dark, cold, empty streets, feeling the same way. For a while, he'd felt really good about helping to capture the bad guys, but now he once again felt like a lost kid in New York. Outside St. Patrick's Cathedral, he stopped and looked up as the bells rang in Christmas. He could hear the choir singing Joy to the World, but there was no joy in Kevin's world tonight. He bent his head down and kept walking. In the hotel room, Kate turned a page of the magazine she was reading and stared down at a photo of the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. She'd always wanted Kevin to see it. Then, suddenly, she had the oddest feeling. Kevin also had an odd feeling, as if he were being drawn somewhere. He crossed Fifth Avenue, went around a corner, and found himself staring up at the biggest, most beautiful Christmas tree he'd ever seen. He gazed sadly at the huge five-pointed gold star at the top of the tree. "I don't want any presents," he said to himself. "All I want is to take back every mean thing I ever said to my family. Even if they don't take back the things they said to me. I don't care. I love all of them. Even Buzz." As the church bells rang in the distance, he said, "Listen, could I just see my mother? I just want my mother. I know I won't see her tonight, but just promise me I can see her again sometime, anytime, even if it's just once, for only a couple of minutes, because I need to tell her I'm sorry." Kevin waited for a moment, as if hoping that by some miracle his wish would come true, but even he was old enough to know it wouldn't. Kevin slowly turned around. Standing 50 feet from him was a woman who looked an awful lot like his mother. It couldn't be, could it? "Mom?" he gasped in a hoarse whisper. Kate turned, then rushed to her son. She felt the tears roll down her cheeks. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Kevin looked at the tree in amazement.
Wow,
He thought.
that worked fast.
Kate hugged him tightly.
How did you know I was here?
Kevin asked. I know you and Christmas trees, Kate said.
I guess this is the biggest one around, huh?
Kevin said. Kate smiled. Let's go tell Dad you're all right,
Where's everyone else?
Kevin asked.
At the hotel.
Kate said, sliding her arm around his shoulder.
They're in New York?
Kevin gasped. Kate smiled. They didn't like the palm trees either. E.F. Duncan stood on the sidewalk outside his store, his wife beside him. Inside, a team of evidence specialists combed through the store looking for clues to the crime. Suddenly, a police car pulled up and a cop jumped out.
It's all over, Mr. Duncan,
he said. Duncan frowned.
What do you mean? We apprehended the thieves and recovered your money.
Mr. Duncan's jaw dropped, and his wife squeezed his arm with delight. Then one of the detectives approached, carrying a brick and an envelope.
Excuse me, are you Mr. Duncan?
Yes, Mr. Duncan said, surprised.
We found this inside. Looks like a kid broke your window.
Mr. Duncan tore open the envelope and found a letter written on a sheet of Plaza Hotel stationery.
Dear Mr. Duncan, I broke your window to catch the bad guys. I'm sorry. Do you have insurance? If you don't, I'll send you some money if I ever get back to Chicago. Merry Christmas, Kevin McAllister.
Mrs. Duncan tugged on her husband's coat sleeve.
What is it, dear?
E.F. Duncan just smiled and said, Turtle doves. The sky was grey at dawn. Up in the McAllister's suite, Kevin slept in a double bed. Fuller jumped out of bed and started yelling,
Wake up, everyone, it's Christmas!
All around, Kevin could hear people grumbling as Fuller woke them up. Suddenly, he heard gasps coming from the foyer of the suite. Curious, he got out of bed and went to look. He found himself staring at a beautiful Christmas tree, surrounded by more gifts than he'd ever seen.
Wow!
Kevin gasped. Everyone waded into the sea of gifts and started tearing open the presents. Suddenly, Buzz raised his arms and shouted,
Stop!
Everyone turned and stared at him.
Listen, Buzz said. If Kevin hadn't screwed things up so bad again, we wouldn't be in this most perfect and huge hotel room with a truckload of free stuff. So it's only fair that he gets to open the first present. Then I'll go, and then the rest of you.
Buzz bent down and picked up a big box and handed it to Kevin.
Merry Christmas, Kev.
Everyone started to applaud. Kevin took a bow and then started to open his present. But something didn't feel right. Suddenly, he realized what it was and ran back to the bedroom. He found his coat and felt the pockets. The turtle doves Mr. Duncan had given him were still there. A little while later, Kevin walked into Central Park. Ahead, he saw the pigeon lady tossing seed to 100 hungry pigeons on the ground around her.
Merry Christmas!
Kevin waved at her. The pigeon lady scowled, then smiled.
Merry Christmas, Kevin.
Kevin stepped through the sea of birds, then took her dirty hand and put one of the turtle doves in it. The pigeon lady looked confused, so Kevin showed her his turtle dove.
Now I have one, and you have one,
He explained.
As long as we each have a turtle dove, we're friends forever.
The pigeon lady blinked.
Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin gave her a hug.
I won't forget you. Trust me.
I do, the pigeon lady said, with a big smile. Kevin smiled back. Everything had worked out great. The kids at the children's hospital would get their money. His family got all those presents from Mr. Duncan. The pigeon lady now had someone she could trust. And as for Kevin, well, he didn't really need to get anything, except for the satisfaction of knowing that after all was said and done, it really was the thought that counts.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation from Harper Audio. To order other titles or for a complete catalog, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. That's 1-800-331-3761. Thank you.